Did you know a stunning 65% of venture capital backed startups fail because they obsess over ideas instead of their people? Yet it's their people who generate ideas, build products, close sales, make big decisions, and keep the business humming. Well, let's have ourselves a pocket sized pep talk, because when these people are not managed well, it's these people who will quickly become the biggest problem.
A Pocket Sized Pep Talk, the podcast that can help energize your business and your life with a quick, inspiring message. Now, here's your host, Rob Jolles.
Today's guest, Dr. Nikki Blacksmith, is co-founder and CEO of Black Hawk Behavior Science and an adjunct faculty member at American University in Washington, D.C. She has nearly 15 years of experience as a scientist practitioner, focusing on decision-making and entrepreneurial performance. She has published over 80 conference papers, book chapters, journal articles, and her scientific research has been featured in top academic publications, including American Psychologist, the Journal of Business and Psychology, and trust me, the list goes on and on. She's the co-author of the new book, Data-Driven Decision-Making in Entrepreneurship, Tools for Maximizing Human Capital. Just came out in April of 2024. Welcome to the show, Nikki. Pleasure having you here.
Thank you. So great to be here.
Excellent. So let's dive in. And with you, I want to start with that 65% failure rate and concept of losing track of human capital, which you clearly believe must be priority number one. Well, me too. So why do so many seem to ignore or forget the human capital they work with?
I don't think they forget. I think it's a lack of tools that exist. It's a hard thing to measure. It's really easy to measure sales quotas. It's a lot more difficult to measure, how well are people performing. So, a lot of companies think about them as almost like intangible assets, things I can't physically see or touch. And so it's really about, it's hard to manage and improve something if you're not measuring it.
Right.
And so that's, I think, the issue is the lack of structure around just measurement tools and understanding how to evaluate the quality and status of the behavior inside an organization.
Yeah. So are they not measuring at all, or are they measuring the wrong data, are they looking in the wrong room?
I would say that they're not measuring it at all, in most cases. If you're in a Fortune 500 company, yes, they're doing it. They're measuring it. They've got things. But for startups and for funders, the access to tools are much, they're a lot less out there that are tailored to that particular environment. So a startup CEO, for example, you're going to want a lot of different things out of that CEO than you would in a corporate organization. So the tools that are built to measure human capital aspects like leadership behavior or employee engagement, they're often designed to facilitate that at a very large corporate level and not at a small business level.
Yeah. I come from the sales community, and we have a lot of salespeople listening, and traditionally they get measured. They get measured on their sales results.
Yep.
And so when I was sort of poking that question at you, I've always felt that we're measuring. That's the good news. Bad news is we're measuring the wrong thing. And it's not that we don't need a measurement there. If I'm going to play golf, I would love to know the measurement of how far I'm hitting my drive. But to become a better golfer, I have to really measure and monitor my swing and what I'm doing, which can be separate. Do you write about that in your book?
Yeah, I think that's really important. The sales example is good. If you think about sales, there's so many factors that could affect the sale. It could be the economy. The customers have different priorities right now. You have a bad region. The list goes on. And so you want to understand what are the behaviors that the salesperson's actually doing that influence the actual closing of the sale. And that's a lot more difficult to measure than the final number or the result. So understanding exactly what are the steps and processes and specific behaviors, just like you're swinging, if you're at golf, like that is a activity that you need to do. And salespeople have activities like building relationships and being able to sound convincing and compelling. And, I there are a lot of, you can talk about something, but doesn't mean you're going to get people excited. A really funny example, my dad was just talking to me the other day and he said, when Jurassic Park first came out, your aunt told me about it and it sounded like the most boring book in the whole world. And I was like, how the heck do you make that book sound boring? But it matters though, the way they're talking, the way they're describing things. And those are the things that you can change and influence. And so that's why it's important to measure those aspects.
Yeah. And just to dwell a little longer on that sales community. Not only do we typically measure, and we need to measure results. So don't get me wrong, but we obsess on that distance, okay, of those results. And yet most companies, if they do put in process behaviors or try and measure, they tend to blur the line between style and technique. And so, I mean, I can give you an example in my industry, and I guess I am right now, just in terms of, let's say, asking an open question or asking a closed question or beginning with trust-based questions. That's a process behavior. That's not my style. That's a technique. How we utilize them, that becomes the style part. I've always found that, the good news is sometimes we'll cross in and we'll find a company or a manager or an organization that's measuring, but they tend to measure the wrong things.
Yeah.
And it just and then they sour on the measurements. That's why we don't measure. I mean, they kind of pull back a little bit.
I hear that a lot from vendors are using tools that were built for different purposes for larger organizations. And they're like, well, we tried this tool and it didn't work. And I was like, well, it wasn't designed to do what you're trying to do with it. So I'm not surprised. So my mission is to really create some tools and resources to fit that context and that situation that is so unique.
Well, let's stay there because that fascinates me. So then the next hurdle, now let's take off my sales hat, put on my trainer hat, is okay. We've got processes out there. I'll give you the poster child for process behaviors that were brilliant that failed, and that is the whole quality movement that kind of poured through. In the end, it wasn't the processes that failed; it was the implementation of the processes that failed. Talk to me about that a little bit.
Yeah, people are so complex and there's so many things that can happen and influence behavior. And when you're talking about a process, I'm thinking back to my early consultant days when the organization I was working for tried to institute project management processes. And the consultants were just not used to doing that. They were used to much more like open and free way to work with their clients versus having, a set of steps. And the reason they were implementing the project management because it was growing, the company was growing, and there's only so many like ways you can, teach a large group of people something. You can't do it person by person. That's just not sustainable. But I don't think the communication around why we were, implementing the project management, what it was for, I think that failed. And then not necessarily failed, it didn't happen as well as it should. And then the consultants didn't want to adopt this new practice, even though we knew the new practice would improve the way the business ran. So it was just kind of more about, the context or the situation around the process, not the actual process itself. And it all came down to human aspects of like, people just don't like change in general. So if you're going to just change their job on them, you got to explain why, get buy-in from them before you start the change process.
Yeah. Well, the whole concept of selling really, and most people don't seem to want to push it anywhere except, well, I guess you're selling insurance or real estate. No, we're selling human being. We're selling that human capital that you're talking about.
Yeah.
We're trying to make our idea their idea. And when we do, implementation is a lot easier. I'll tell you one other thing, you're a teacher, teacher to trainer. I can tell you 20 things I don't like about, Zooming and virtual training. I don't mind having a conversation on Zoom. I
Mhm.
actually like it a lot better than a phone call. Um, but to teach somebody a difficult skill on, virtually, I've soured on it. I do it. I'm happy to do it, and I'll claim I'll do it better than any other human being. But to get the mind share of a human being is difficult. But the implementation, back to implementation. Hmm, there's planting the garden. I think needs to be face to face, but growing the garden, I think implementation can be impacted by virtual team coaching and sort
Mhm.
of staying with it. Do you talk about that in your book at all, or I'm throwing training concepts at you left and right, but do you talk about that at all?
Yeah, and training concepts I think are a great like angle to look at this because essentially what we're trying to do is behavior change. You're teaching
Yeah.
people to operate in a different way, and it's not something that they can just do automatically. They have to understand why and how, and so I think the training lens is good. Um, and I think it's important. Like I love your teaching example because I have taught on Zoom and I am not as effective of a professor when I'm doing it that way. And so there are situational constraints that matter that, you have to facilitate and understand. You have to understand human capital, like you have to sell the people basically, not just oh, like here's a picture from, what I see in typical startup like pitch decks is a couple headshots of the team, little snapshots of like the logos for the companies they've worked before, but that essentially doesn't really tell you anything about the team. So it's hard to sell and explain why someone should invest in the team. And so understanding what it is about human capital that is going to drive performance is kind of the first step, right? Is understanding well, what does even effective team look like and how do we talk about that? And you can't sell it if you don't understand it. So there is that educational and that training component that comes up front.
Right. You hear that, sales folks? You can't sell it if you don't understand it. Well, and I'm the single biggest culprit for that because I actually believe in sales. We way over train people on product knowledge, in other words,
Mhm.
and we don't really teach them well enough about how to communicate with other people, how to gain trust, etc.
Yeah.
Occasionally, I do get caught short on de-emphasizing the product so much that I do have salespeople go, "Will we ever actually know what we're selling?" Do we? But I'm with you. Have you ever heard, Nikki? Have you ever heard of the four levels of of competency, starting with what we call the unconscious incompetent and conscious incompetent? You ever heard of those terms before?
I mean, I've heard the terms. I'm not sure about that specific framework, but
Yeah.
I'm sure I can follow you.
Well, I'll introduce you to two of them, and then it'll make sense because you're describing it. I think when we really step up and do our job, and that's what you're describing now, not just motivating, inspiring people, but putting true, measurable pieces in front of people. There is the reason why the implementation can fail is because we never get past the conscious competency. In other words, okay, I know how it works as long as I have Nikki's book in my right hand and my paper in my left, and I can study it, but it's not natural yet. And what we want to be is unconsciously competent. I love to do everything you're teaching me and not necessarily be obsessed with every step of the process.
Yeah.
Uh, I want it to be natural. I want my swing to be natural. And that's where in teaching, it's very difficult to do. But in following up what we're describing now, not so hard to do. We can keep
Yeah.
tapping it till it becomes an unconscious behavior. So I think that they work hand in hand, my
Yeah,
opinion.
absolutely. And the way the book is designed is to kind of sell that why and explanation and that unconscious competence that you described first,
Yeah.
and then introduce processes and tutorials and ways to actually do the work. But totally agree with you.
Yeah. And by the way, a good book like yours, a lot of times takes people from what we call unconscious incompetency, which means some people don't know that they don't know.
Yeah.
And that's one of the joys of doing a podcast for me is I learn a lot of things I just didn't know about. I
Yeah.
thought I knew, but like I said, didn't know that I didn't know it. It's hard to fix something when you're at that level. So, that's why we grab books. Data-driven decision-making and entrepreneurship, tools for maximizing human capital. All right. Came out in April. How's it doing?
It's doing really well. We've been on a couple, CEO World put it on one of their best book lists. Got some great reviews. I constantly hear praise for the second chapter, which is about a really simple way to understand how to build job descriptions and recruit and hire the people you need. That's one of the biggest pain points of startups is, it's really hard, even for me as a startup leader, I know we need, technology people, but I don't know anything about coding or developing. So it's really hard to hire somebody that's going to be good if I don't really understand what good is. And so it gives a really nice framework to create those that understanding so you can get the best people, because you're not going to get the best people unless you know what it means to be the best.
Well, I'm leaning in because most of the managers that I talk to will tell me their single biggest challenge is
Mhm.
finding, the right personnel. That is their hardest job. It takes up most of their time. And when they've had a good day, they found somebody they've gotten, and when they didn't, they didn't. So I'm going to test you, author. It's believe me, folks, it's hard to go, well, I'll just do the whole chapter in 90 seconds for you, Rob. But give me a little bit of a cheat sheet of that chapter too, because you've got it. You got me and a few people walking dogs right now leaning in. So how about a couple tips in that area?
Yeah, so the first kind of tip is just the framework about thinking about a job. So what are the tasks or things that you actually need the person to do? So instead of just thinking, oh, we need a salesperson, like what do you need that salesperson to do? Are they cold calling? Are they taking clients out to dinner? Like there's a lot of different ways to sell something, and it depends on the product. And so defining like what is it that they're going to be doing, and then what does success look like? So I always like to start with the end goal and tell people like you can't get where you want to go if you don't know where you're going. And so kind of defining like what does that ideal candidate look like? And I think there's a few different things that they need to understand. So one is understand the job and what success looks like. But then what are those traits that are predictive of those areas? So if you have somebody who's going to be coding and developing and spending 90% of their time in front of their computer, probably not that important that they have teamwork skills because they're going to be working independently very often. But if you're a salesperson and you're working with a team that that has approach and you're communicating, that's probably very important to be able to have and coordinate and make sure things are moving, the workflow is moving. So understand the job success and then figure out what predicts that. And the way you can figure that out in the book chapter really describes creating what we call job consoles. So bring in people that are actually experts in that space to and ask them a series of questions about the job and what success looks like. Because if you're like me, like the technology example, like I don't know what it looks like to be good in this area. So actually just earlier today I was on a call with somebody who's been a CTO of a company and in technology, and we kind of walked them through, my co-founder walked them through our product in the background just to get their thoughts about what kind of person do we need to do this really well. And so calling on your network, your experts in the space, rather than just kind of guessing what it might look like, can get you a lot better result. And informing that and then creating that. And I think the last piece is when you think about a hire, there's two parts. Can they do the job? And that's really important. That's kind of what I just talked about. And then the second part is, are they going to fit in the culture? Because they can do the job, but if they don't fit in the culture, they're just going to come and leave. And it's just a really expensive and big waste of time. And so you have to understand what you want in terms of a culture fit. And people know this a lot. They're like, yeah, we need someone who fits a culture. But where the problem comes is when we're like, okay, now what is your culture? Like define it, explain it. Because if you can't do that, then it's going to be really, really hard to find someone who is a fit.
Can you give me an example of a classic culture than an org, because I hear you, and I'm already thinking, ooh, I think I would drop the ball on that one.
Yeah.
So just give me an example, but cherry pick a couple good ones.
Yeah, I have lots of good stories. So, well, I'll just do one personal story. So our company really values what we call epic curiosity. And so it's this idea that we're constantly learning, that we're never ever going to like master any topic, and that we should be learning from all different perspectives. So the way we hire is like the person has to be curious. They have to want to learn information and pull information from different spots, because that's how we develop really great products. Like, this is going to sound crazy, but some of the best ideas I've gotten some from for our products have been from books about trees and how trees work together and how trees communicate. And it just started changing my mind about the way teams work. And so I applied a lot of those concepts to helping teams become more effective by understanding how trees are effective working together, linking their roots. And so for us, it's like, if there's somebody that isn't curious, that doesn't have like all my members, my team members, are curious in their own ways, but I can tell because they're seeking out information that just not directly relevant to everything that they do. And it's just, they think of it as fuel for the brain. Like, they're just feeding their brain in order to create more creative ideas. And so they pull information from all different spots. So if we had someone who wasn't like that, they would probably get very frustrated with our team, because we like to brainstorm and talk about different ideas. And sometimes we get on weird sidetracks that in theory sound like sidetracks, but they're actually directly relevant to what we're talking about. So I can see somebody coming in and just being like, this is too abstract and unclear. I need something more structured. I need rules. I need, just tell me what I need to know, and then that's it, So that kind of person would be a really bad fit for our culture.
Right. Well, I want to compliment you. You're going over some things to me that are not just interesting, but they're a little contrary to the way I've been thinking. And I'll give you an example of one. And I'm embarrassed to tell you that I've spent almost 15 years helping people in career transition. So I prep a lot of interviews, and I'm working, and I'm going to tell you the piece that's resonating with me that you're talking about. I have sort of my favorites, the go-to list, and one being team. I keep a call bell on my desk. My call bell's right here. You'll hear it in a second. Okay, that's my call bell. I hit that bell every time I hear the word team in an answer. Okay, because I'm trying to get people to, it's not, you really want to be about the team. And yet you just provided an example. By the way, I think team's a pretty safe one, but you provided an example that said, I'm a paraphrase, it may be safe, but it's not a slam dunk. Not everybody's necessarily looking for that. And so you've substituted and said, maybe it's curiosity. Maybe they're not working with a whole lot of people. If they're craving a team, they won't find it here.
Yeah.
What we're looking for is a self-starter, somebody's curious. And so that's very helpful to me. And I hope to others as well who are listening to say, once again, what trap are we falling into? Well, I like people who are team players. Good for you. Let's look at the company. It's a mistake we can make. So kudos to you. I think that's really helpful and interesting that you went right after, unbeknownst to you, you went right after my go-to and moved it aside. Very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, teams operate differently, and you got to really understand that culture. And one culture that I just really admire and think about fit is Disney. They're very good at being like, this is what we stand for, and this is who we are. And if you're not a whimsical, playful person, probably not the best company for you. And that is a culture fit. It's not, you need to be whimsical to, sell it.
Although I've done a little work with Disney, and it's a wonderful company. I love the company, and I'd love to work with Disney some more. But there is a hierarchy in that company. In the park, we were one way, but go into the corporate office, and they're not wearing mouse ears.
Yeah. That's a good point. I did some work with Disney as well, and I was thinking of examples from when I worked with the park.
Right. Exactly. But, and that also tells, I worked with Xerox. We had 100,000 employees. People would ask me, what's it like? Are people nice? It's like, you mean my little sliver of people? It's hard to pull that culture. So I think that's where a lot of pre-call planning comes in, and where we start looking at who we're going to be interviewing with, and that's why we have some nice tools now, LinkedIn, other things where we can really get the flavor of who we're about to talk to in the company as well. All right, cool. All right, takeaways. Let's talk about some takeaways. You know, you're a teacher, again, teacher to trainer. I'll never say this out loud, although I'm going to do it now. But I don't like if you walk away with one or two good ideas. Come on, I'm here delivering. But that's usually when we're in a workshop, when we do a keynote, when we have a 40-minute conversation.
Mhm.
I think it is legitimate to say, hey, if people walk away with two or three great ideas from what you've written and your research and your book, uh, I got mine. I got one of mine already. Give us a couple others that you think, boy, if you get through that book, I'm going to tell you where a lot of your emails or your conversations seem to land. What are we leaving with?
Well, I think you started off at a really good point, which is the people and how important they are. And I hear a lot of investors say that the people are their most important thing that leads to their decision. Um, but if we think about the framework and the way we think about successful startups, the biggest kind of model that everyone follows is the lean startup model, uh, which is very popular and pushes the idea that you just need to create a product, put it out there, test it, iterate, whatnot. And I don't disagree with that. I think that's a great concept, but I feel like it's missing something before create a great product. And that is put a really stellar team together so that you can create that product. And so it really kind of overemphasizes the product as if it's this magical thing that just like comes into existence. But really great products come from great people. So I think one takeaway is, companies are people, especially startups. Like the startup is effectively the 2 or 3 people that you're investing in. There's not a whole lot extra that comes with it. I think the other takeaway is this is not easy work, right? This is not like there's no one size fits all. And you kind of talked about that earlier. People are so complex and dynamic. And so it's not oh, we just need to pull up this tool off the shelf and plug it in. It's really a mindset shift of how you run the organization and how you think about success. And the last thing I'll say is the takeaway is the people should be invested in. Like people can grow and learn. And when I think about the way startups get like funded these days, a lot of it's kind of a sink or swim approach, very familiar to where consulting was maybe in like the 80s, where they just hired, Deloitte hired tons of people and whoever could make it to the top stayed. And I feel like that's kind of similar to how startups are invested. They just, here's some money, go, come back to us with reports instead of investing in 10 companies and hoping maybe one works out, we'll invest in 3 and put all the rest of the resources into helping them succeed, growing, teaching them leadership and management skills, since they probably came in there with technical skills to begin with. And so the return on investment also comes from investing back into the people throughout the process, not just in the beginning.
Yeah, well said. And I wish companies would do more of that. Um, you one thing you said that really resonated with me in terms of, how difficult it is, to get the right people, but how important it is, particularly for a startup. When you're working for 100,000 person company, getting the wrong person in there is bad. Not good, folks, but the company will survive.
Yeah.
You're talking about a startup. It could dramatically change the trajectory of the entire idea, company, lives, everything.
Yeah.
It's huge. And so it's not lost on me. And yet you also drop in the part about getting people to contribute more to these companies. Maybe if we're more data driven,
Mhm.
we can get rid of some of the inequities that you write about.
Yeah.
You with me on that
No,
one?
no, I'm totally with you. And the reason why we started the company is because there is a lot of like funding inequity, and people that should be getting opportunities might not get the opportunities because they don't look like this image that we have in our head of what a successful entrepreneur looks like. Um, and a lot of funders are making decisions off of past experience and gut instinct, which usually is a great idea, but it's limited. So if you add data, and maybe instead of data driven, it's data informed, because I
Right,
do
right.
think the experience still matters. But when you have the data to show you something that you can't get, all of a sudden the decisions start to become a little more like, oh, I can analyze this person without having knowledge about it because the data tells me this. Like, I don't have to work with somebody for a year to know that they're not coachable and won't take other people's advice because they have a giant ego. Or you could learn, this person is motivated by really leaving a legacy. So let's keep them going by helping them figure out how to do that. And so the data really changes the conversation to what do these people have, or does this person have what it takes to do the job well? Are they going to perform in the future? Not, did somebody else I know invest in them, or did they come from my social network and get a warm introduction? Or, are they assertive and confident, which is great, but confidence does not equal performance. And I think you mentioned that earlier when you're talking about, there's the Dunning-Kruger effect. So basically people with lower abilities, let's just say in sales, since we've been using that example, they don't have as much knowledge or experience or information about sales, will overestimate their abilities, while the people who are very good at it will underestimate it. And so it's because you don't know what you don't know. So you just feel more confident, but the more you learn, the more you realize, oh, there's a lot more I could do. So that's typically what happens. And I feel like confidence is really important in founders and CEOs, and it's something that funders put a lot of emphasis on, but it sometimes can be misleading. So
Yeah.
having that data can really help you understand, like, it can almost be like a confirmation or a validation, or maybe shows you like a red flag that you might not have originally identified.
I'll give you three words. I think that's something, and you can say, not exactly, Rob. I have no problem when people disagree with me, by the way. I kind of like it. Uh, but, I taught quality for Xerox, and we taught problem solving, quality improvement. And the three words that we were always focused on, and the reason why we use tools and data-driven mechanisms, the three words were facts from feelings. We're trying to separate the facts from the feelings, because a lot of times we don't even know that our feelings are beginning to overtake us. It could be somebody who just looks like somebody that
Yeah.
we had a really, that we worked with 10 years ago, and we don't even know it, by the way. Just,
Yeah.
I tell you, I'm looking at that guy and he's going to be a good one. Well, where are the facts? They get a
Yeah.
feeling. I'm okay with a feeling, but that's where data comes in, and it
Mhm.
helps straighten us out.
Absolutely. I love that. Actually, when I was doing my postdoc at the Army Research Institute, I was studying decision making, and particularly unconscious bias. So
Mhm.
exactly what you're talking about, like these things in your brain that are telling you to go one way or the other that you don't even realize. And there's some really common ones, like you mentioned, like, oh, this person is similar to somebody else I know. So all of a sudden your brain likes them more because they feel familiar. Or confirmation bias, where somebody thinks something and then they just get information that confirms what they believe. So it makes their belief stronger, but they didn't realize that they weren't looking at any of the information that contradicted what they were thinking. So they had a limited view. So there's so many things like that our brain evolutionary wise has like taught us to do, in order to adapt and survive, which is great, but it also leads sometimes to biased decisions. And when we think about, there's availability biases, which means you think of whatever you have available in your brain. So if you haven't had experiences with entrepreneurs before, but you watch Silicon Valley on HBO, all of a sudden that image of what success looks like comes directly from that TV show instead of actually working with someone. So your brain can trick you for sure.
Actually, happens a lot with, not a lot, it happens with teachers and trainers.
Mhm.
That when I'm teaching trainers, I'm always putting them through, I actually put them through an exercise where they look at a case study about a mortgage and they're waiting and somebody's not calling them back and they called and that person is out for the day. And what are you going to do? And the people will be, I'm leaving, I'm firing, I'm this, I'm that. And what's happening is that those past experiences of, well, the last time I got a loan, it wasn't so good. Well, when's the closing? I mean, this is a trainer trick, but I'll
Mhm.
ask them a whole lot of data that isn't even in there, and they'll go, I have no idea when closing. What if I told you it was 3 months from now? What if you don't know, you're making decisions based on old experiences.
Mhm.
And that's why we need data driven, in my opinion. That's why we need books like yours and teachers like you to remind us that there's a place for feelings, but data is a very powerful mechanism at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think it's so important. And I want to say something contradictory to that though.
Good.
I,
Oh, good.
I, I think data is incredible. It's helpful. It helps you make better decisions, but integrate it with those feelings and experience because data is not always 100%, you know, depends on where the data comes from, how good it is and how it's collected. And there's that phrase, for artificial intelligence now, a lot of people talk about when they're like training something, they're like, garbage in, garbage out. So whatever you put into the training model is going to come out so that it's only as good as it was trained. So data is amazing, but it's limited. So there should be some sort of integration of multiple forms of data and also kind of like use your logic and reality to assess the quality of the data.
Perfect. I'm glad you fixed me up there because no way do I want people to think that I'm not using my experience and instinct uh, here. But
Exactly. You've done
yeah,
a lot.
yeah. But for me, I'm just telling you, I'm a social person.
Mhm.
I can lose track and fall into that unconscious incompetency trap. I can lose track of the fact that I'm a little bit overweighted on my feelings. I don't want to get rid of them, but boy, you put the two together and you've got yourself a nice cake there, right?
Yeah, I mean, feelings, like you said, they're
Yeah.
actually, there's one of my favorite books, it's called How Emotions Are Made. And it basically contradicts our understanding of emotions. So when we think of emotions, we think of them as, oh, this person said something mean to me, so now I'm upset and angry, and it's a reaction. But it's actually what you described earlier, where your brain is like searching through all the past experiences you've had and trying to figure out what should, how should you react to this moment based on, so they're more like predictions than they are reactions, but
Yeah.
they're coming from, and that's why people have trauma and they get triggered just because your brain's like, well, last time you were in this situation, here's what happened, so beware. But knowing that and understanding that can actually be really useful
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
when making decisions. Because if you do have a lot of experience in something, you shouldn't discount your knowledge. You've done it for 20 years or 30
Yeah.
years. Know something that other people
Or whatever. Yes.
don't.
Okay. Well, delightful conversation. Really enjoyed talking to you. The book is Data Driven Decision Making in Entrepreneurship, Tools for Maximizing Human Capital. You get the right human capital in there, you got a whole lot better chance of falling out of that 65% failure category. And I think what we've agreed at this summit that we've just had is that we're going to put tools in together with our human experiences and
Mhm.
intuition, and we do that, we're in pretty daggone good shape.
Yep.
How do people get a hold of you, Nikki?
I'm really easy to find on LinkedIn, Nikki Blacksmith. Otherwise, they can go to our website, Blackhawk with an E at the end, .io, and find information there. And we have all sorts of content that we try to create to share and educate that's free.
But and we'll have it on the website, et cetera. But I know that website. Say it again because that IO got by me the first time, and it may have gotten by a few other people. What's the website again?
It's Blackhawk, BLACKHAWKE. So it's Blackhawk with an E at the end, I as in ice cream, O is an octopus.
There you go. Good. All right. I just want to
Or
make sure people get there.
industrial organizational, which is
Good. Good. And the neat thing about Nikki, by the way, is, and I learned this before we started our conversation, is yes, she's a teacher, but she's an entrepreneur. She's out there. She's using these tools. She's not just writing about it. So to me, that adds a lot of credibility what you're doing. I want to thank you for being on. Really appreciate it. As usual, I'm very selfish. When I learn, I really like the podcast, and I learned a ton today. So thank you so much for being a part. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a blast.
Good. Well, we'll do it again as well as we can next time, everybody. Until then, stay safe.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please rate and recommend it on iTunes, Outcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get more information on this show and Rob at jollis.com.